Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take you on a journey. On a journey of today's games between Fnatic and Mad Lions, how we got here, what conclusions we can reach, and then setting up for tomorrow's series between G2 and Origen. So today, in the first draft of the day, we saw Fnatic showing the Senna again. Trash with gold seems to be very strong. He gets a lot of armor and he was super tanky. Picked up a lot of souls, and anything with gold early on, anything that can buy Sunfire Cape early on, is such a strong mid-game item. It renders you practically unkillable because most AD carries don't have enough burst to get through you, and AD carries honestly just don't want to auto-attack you. We saw that one time where Mad Lions tried to force in the mid lane, but it just didn't work. This just didn't work. The Thresh was just too tanky, and then the game was lost. Nemesis honestly looking really good this playoffs. I think he's playing better this playoffs than he has entire regular splits. I think he seems to be very informed. The Azir lock-in looked very good, and locking in Zoe against double tank is just something that you just don't want to do. The enemy team already had enough cleanse value to pick cleanse without Zoe in the picture. With Zoe in the picture, it becomes even more apparent. So the cleanse value, the early game power of Rek'Sai covers up for any potential weakness in the early game, and then Fnatic with the superior team play get ahead, and of course Mad Lions kind of running it down there in the mid lane. Second game was much more interesting because we had this composition that was designed to deal with Aphelios, but the side note of that is that you might run into some problems elsewhere. So Aphelios is not going to play the game, right? Malphite last pick, definitely he's not going to play the game. The key thing here is that when Nautilus gets locked in, the AP damage numbers are going to be super low when Mad Lions with their composition have Olaf, Aphelios, and Aatrox very AD heavy. We saw it in Bwipo's itemization. It's just full armor. No one can really kill him. You can't really avoid him because he does so much damage and he threatens Aphelios at every nook and turn. So that was a very strong pick. But the key thing, of course, is the early game is quite tricky to pull off. Nautilus, Olaf, it is very difficult for Yasuo to play against this because Yasuo has only one gear. The reason Yasuo Gragas is super strong in some scenarios and very weak in some scenarios is because it is super easy and predictable how Yasuo is going to play. It's a melee champion that has to walk on the wave and the mid wave. His dash, sure, can be used defensive, but it has to be on minions. Yasuo's gameplay pattern is very predictable, and when he can play aggro and he can fight, then he's super strong. When he can't, it's more difficult. So it's very natural that in this mid lane matchup that Yasuo's going to die a couple of times. He kept up in CS, took some Raptors and so forth, and kept along in the game. Just long enough for Gragas and Malphite to kind of take over and give the game back into their hands. Key thing is, Mad Lions need to really get ahead, and they managed to get ahead because they were 4k gold ahead, but then afterwards, that one execution around that Drake, the team fight that Bwipo just kind of 1v9'd was the key moment. Also, Roma died a lot to the Malphite Gragas, which kind of kept Fnatic in the game. I think if Roma played a better weak side, it would have been even better. So I think, Mad Lions got exposed in the sense of Roma being kind of a person that dies isolated many times. He was just behind Humanoid in terms of isolated deaths in the regular splits, and this is something that happened. Mad Lions definitely against a team that is more calculated in their aggression. It seemed a lot harder for them to get rolling. Fnatic are very clinical in their approach. They have the craziness and they have the way of executing fights, which is always a great tool for them to come back into games. They did it against Origen, and now they did it against Mad Lions from large deficits. They seem very fearless. No matter what the state of the game is in, they are very level-headed about how they need to approach it, which makes Fnatic so dangerous. And in this series, we saw many different sides of Fnatic. Game 3 was a complete storm, right? Second game was them recovering after a rough early game, analyzing the fights, how they need to execute them. Of course, they had the team composition that was very good at fighting, but still a very large deficit that Mad Lions managed to build up. Like, of course, a lead in their case and deficit in Fnatic's case. And in game number one, a slow approach where they just look to punish Mad Lions' kind of mistakes because they have the composition that scales better. Rek'Sai covering any early game weaknesses, and then a lot of aggression onto Humanoid, a lot of good Azir shuffles, and in general, just a strong showcasing here for Fnatic. Makes me super excited. Makes me super excited. The next discussion is, of course, Mad Lions and winning G2. How bad did G2 actually play, and how good is actually Fnatic? And these are the questions that are going to come up, right? So, Fnatic managed to 3-0 the Mad Lions that beat G2. So we take it back to the series. No matter what people want to say, the series was still rather close between G2 and Mad. And I think that's, to some, very shocking, right? There could be a world where G2 walked away from that victory and we would have a best of 5 between G2 and Fnatic today if some certain things were played different. People want to highlight the Satchel, but something that you can highlight as well is like maybe out of the Bard ult, maybe you should just look to one-shot the Syndra with an RQ right from afar because you have the distance control and then Syndra wouldn't be able to approach and then you would hit it. You could argue that the Bard needed to itemize different because he knew who you'd go for this, some items that would make it easy for him to kill Nexus or whatever, right? There were some things that could have been done different and the series in general was quite close. The key thing, if we look at G2's, story of the regular split, they had some very, very low lows. They had high highs, but very low lows. If we take a look at the losses wasn't against the top teams. They beat Origen twice, they beat Fnatic twice. They lost against Schalke 04, giving them the first victory. They lost against Misfits, dying to a very, very, probably the weakest bot lane coming into playoffs, Bvoy and Denik. Caps was running it down, right? They lost the game against Mad Lions, right? That game was a bit more fair because Mad Lions, G2 definitely played a strong early game and that was like a more fair game, and I don't think it was necessarily G2 being like terrible on the day. Silas pick maybe was a bit iffy, but my point still stands that G2's lowest has been showcased to us. And I feel like this is what we got a taste of in that best of 5 against Mad Lions. Caps getting caught over and over. Mad Lions being very aggressive in their approach and matching that style of G2 very, very well. Mad Lions very fearless in their approach and, very assertive and, dominant in their approach to the game. They were taking fights and they were responding to G2 in good fashion, but this is not something that works against everyone, right? Not everyone's going to take every fight like G2 did in that series. And I don't think G2 coming into the next series that they play will do something similar. So I am of the opinion that we saw the lowest form of G2 in the series against Mad Lions. And I know hindsight is 2020, and I don't want to take anything away from Mad Lions because they have made significant improvements throughout the split. Started, it ended with that Origen game where they beat Origen in a very fantastic fashion, and there's a lot of strength about Mad Lions. But I still think the final is going to be between Fnatic and G2. I think stylistically, G2 versus Origen, I don't think Origen have the capacity to punish at the same level as Mad Lions have. So even in a world where we get the weakest version of G2, I don't think it will be as explosive as it was for Mad Lions. Origen don't have any power in the 2v2 mid, which is surprising. I think Nuktak is the type of player that, plays all the right champions. And he's being put on, champions that are kind of, in some cases he's even put on champions that need to 2v2. He played Rumble against Fnatic and he was just left on an island, and Rumble is not designed for that. Rumble mid lane is all about, playing 2v2 and spreading that pressure across the whole map. And then, sacrificing waves and getting prio and so forth. It's not about like a 1v1 champion. You don't pick Rumble to 1v1 Cassio. That's just not what you do. So Origen, 2v2 non-existent. They play heavy into side lanes. Xerxes chooses, either he plays into bottom and either he plays into top. It's very, very obvious what he chooses and he sticks to it, which is, not a bad thing, because when junglers, spread the resources around, it's kind of, maybe exponential is not the right word, but think of it, if you gank top, you burn a flash. If you gank again, you get a kill. If you gank again, you screw over a top lane that doesn't have TP, right? So every additional, like all the additional pressure that you build, it kind of grows exponentially, so to speak. But I don't know if exponential is the right term, because I wouldn't be able to create some kind of formula for it. But you get my point, right? It's like the second gank and the third gank is more impactful than the previous gank. So it makes sense. I'm not blaming Xerxes for that, but it makes it predictable. And G2 as a team, the wins that they had against Mad Lions was through heavy 2v2 mid. I remember that game specifically when G2 played Jarvan and Rumble, and throughout the regular split, G2 was very, very strong when it came to managing the 2v2 mid lane. Better than any team in our league, honestly, in the regular split. It's very easy to focus in on that Mad Lions series. Very, very easy to focus in on those series. Very, very easy to focus in on those bad moments. Similar, for many weeks, the only thing that was talked about was, Caps cannot play traditional AD carries. He played the failures, got caught over and over. Sure, he had a terrible game against Misfits, but then there was Ezreal games that were really, really good. Senna games that were really good. Talia games that were really good. None of them, in the sense of traditional AD carries, maybe they don't fit the bill, because Ezreal is like a caster, Senna's like a caster, and Talia is also a caster, a spell caster, not a caster like me or whatever. You get my point. I still think, Caps showed a lot of good things throughout the regular split, and this was very unorthodox, and it felt like he had the performance of the Misfits series, or the Misfits game, throughout the entire series, and G2 definitely showed us at their lowest low. The odds of it happening again, it can happen. G2 could come into the next best of 5 against Origen, and still, have that low level of play. Could happen. I don't want to, remove that from the equation. But I doubt it. I feel like one best of 5 is enough for G2. This best of 5 doesn't nullify all of the good things they did throughout the regular season. Perks being heralded as the best mid laner. Jankos heralded as the best jungler. This doesn't just disappear. It doesn't. Right? So I expect G2 to bounce back. And I think OG stylistically wouldn't punish a low-level G2 anyway. So I feel like here, G2 have the time to recuperate. They got to see OG play. OG had to pull up some zillion tricks in the bot lane with the Senna, which is alright, I think everyone at this point knows it exists, so I don't think G2 would be shocked by it. But I definitely think that G2 is favored coming into this matchup. There is, of course, a chance that everything goes horribly, and this last best of 5 is something that affects G2 on a deep level, because maybe they're not accustomed to losing best of 5s, but I think with the experience that is on this roster, I don't think this is going to faze them. I think this is something that, probably angered them in a good way, and they've had a lot of time to prepare, considering they played on Friday last week, and now they're going to play on Sunday, so there's been a lot of breathing room for them, where Origen got a lot less. The key thing, if you ask me to make a prediction for who wins this, for me, I'm leaning towards Fnatic just because of the position they're in. In the finals week, what's going to happen is, if G2 beat Origen, is that they need to face Mad Lions, and then the next day face Fnatic. Playing back-to-back best of 5s is super, super difficult, especially when the enemy gets to watch you. Super, super difficult. So if G2 manage to pull this off, it is going to be more impressive than their previous wins, because they do it from the lower bracket. The odds of teams winning through the lower bracket, it just seems almost impossible. Fnatic came very close last year, taking it to 5 games. They lost 5 games, and then boom, they had the of course, the I don't know what you want to call it, semi-finals against Schalke 04. Blew them out of the water, no problem. And then, of course, they continued. So it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. And I think G2's position, because they have to play back-to-back best of fives, makes it more difficult. A lot more difficult. But in the series against Origen, Origen play very slow, calculated. Slow is something that people regard as bad. But if you're in a position where you know you're going to win, if you don't make any major mistakes, who's going to fault you, right? Who is going to fault you? It is, think of it like this. You have the option of ordering, let's say you order an item online. You have one option where you have it guaranteed in 7 days. It's coming to you in 7 days. You have the other option. It can come in 3 days, but let's say, there is a 20% chance that it doesn't arrive. Origen is the team that just wants their item, and that's all right. I think when you play against the low tier teams, that's all right. If you're playing against Rogue, that's all right. No problem. But it's going to bite you in the ass when you play against the quicker teams, because they're going to look for opportunities. They're going to look to scare you in a way where you cannot make the calculated approach. And I think this is where G2 is so different. This is where Fnatic is so different. They pressure you in a different way. They use Fog of War in a different way. They use base timings in a different way. And looking to farm it out and looking to stall, if you are looking for secure victories against lower tier teams, I don't mind. But facing G2, I just think stylistically this is mismatch. I think OG did show some promise against Fnatic, and I think teams and players and analysts across the board don't give them enough credit for that, because the first 2 games were just lost in draft. Fnatic dominated, of course. Fnatic played well, but at the same time, they severely outdrafted Origen. And this has been the trend for Origen. At least in the last 2 best of 5s they played, first 2 games have been terrible for OG. For me, the series kind of started game 3. But that was a game where Fnatic completely entered draft, They said it themselves publicly that, we just tried something in draft. We played Azir, we played Trundle. We had this composition that was kind of cocktail. We tried to end it. Helisang split push. It was a fun game. Game number 4. Game number 4 was more of a serious game. What happened in that game was Upset Destiny got 2v2 kills. Xerxes had a better jungle performance in comparison to Selfmade. He camped the shit out of Bwipo. They were ahead, 5,000 gold, and then the famous Upset getting caught. I don't want to put more flame on Upset because we don't really know what happened in this situation. Well, it was silly, right? Origen threw the game, regardless of who you want to blame. They threw the game. Fnatic once again, boom, get a lead. Fnatic, just take it home. The moment Fnatic have a lead, magnifique, they take it home, right? That's crazy. It's just super, super insane, the level Fnatic is operating at, but I want to give Origen credit, right? The series against Rogue was uninteresting, but they got the W on the board. And it didn't seem like at any point in time that they were not in control of the games, especially after the 2nd game, 3rd game, 4th game, right? Didn't feel like Origen was not in control. So Origen fans, what you have to hope for is that this was a stylistic choice against Rogue. But hope only gets you that far. This is the style that Origen have played with throughout the split. This is the style they had against Fnatic. This is the style they had against G2 too. Against Fnatic it worked once, that one game, and the first week of the regular split, where they managed to, the Gangplank Alfari did some good work, self-made on Kiana, blah blah blah. You remember that game. The other games didn't work out. So I just think stylistically G2 have a good matchup here. Mad Lions is the type of team that can punish mistakes. Origen, sure. But I think the mistakes will be less apparent to Origen because they are not forcing and pressuring you and looking for those opportunities constantly like Mad Lions did in those series. So I think G2, honestly, I'm going to give it a 3-0. Screw it. 3-1 predictions are boring. 3-0. I think G2 is going to win, naturally, 3-0. But I can imagine a world where G2 drop a game or 2. But 3-1 is so boring. So boring. I don't want to do 3-1. Screw it. 3-0 G2. I think G2 is favored. You can put your money on G2. Your own risk. I'm not giving any advice here on what to bet. I'm just giving you my fun facts, about how I think the series is going to go. Nevertheless, that's it for today. I have a massive headache, man. This quarantine business is really, I need to find a way to deal with it properly. I have a lot of things in the work that is happening behind the scenes that I can't talk about. Hopefully I can reveal it soon. But for me, it's some of the best news and best things that have happened in a long time. And hopefully I can share with all of you very soon for those who have watched until the end of the video. G2 have a lot to prove. This playoff is going to be super exciting because, G2 beating Origen means we have a G2 Mad Lions rematch. And regardless of what the final will be, it will be super exciting. I'm just not hoping for a shitty G2 that would beat Origen in a very disgusting fashion, 3-2, and then losing to Mad Lions, and then Mad Lions getting 3-0 in the final. That would be so anticlimactic. Nevertheless, if you reach the end of the video, thank you very much. I am very proud of you. I'll give you a minute to just talk to me. I will listen to you. I understand. That sounds really tough. That makes a lot of sense. Everything will be all right. I'm sure you'll be fine. You're very strong and smart. I'm proud of you. I have to go now.